Hey guy, tonight we drift into the cracked clay and soot-smudged world of the Middle Ages, the time period that movies like to make look all noble, with the knights shining in polished armor and maidens sipping wine by candlelight. But actually, it mostly smelled like manure, bad beer, and open sewer. And tonight, you're not a knight or a noble. You're just you, except born 800 years too early, dropped into a world where life is mostly mud, fleas, and disappointment. Forget the myth of medieval glory. Forget castles glittering like fairy tales. Reality? The castles were drafty death traps. The peasants were hungry 90% of the time, and everyone reeked because bathing was basically a seasonal event. You wouldn't last a week, but don't worry. Tonight, you don't have to. You only have to live through it in your imagination. You arrive into the world not in some warm hospital with machines beeping and nurses cooing, but on a pile of straw in a dim, smoky hut. The midwife isn't sterilized. The midwife doesn't even know what sterilized means. She wipes her hands on her apron, says a quick prayer, and gets to work. If you make it out alive, congratulations. If your mother makes it out alive too, that's basically a miracle. Infant mortality is the background music of the Middle Ages. Out of every 10 children, maybe 5 survive past age 5. The rest, fevers, bad milk, plague, or just the brutal randomness of medieval medicine, which usually involved a priest saying it's God's will, and a doctor suggesting bloodletting. You cry, you live, and somehow you're swaddled up and tossed near the fire, which, by the way, fills the hut with more smoke than warmth. You're breathing soot before you can even say your first word. Your first memories aren't of toys or birthday parties. They're of mud. Endless, sucking mud. Your village road isn't paved. It's a trench of filth where pigs, chickens, and barefoot children all play in the same slurry of manure and rainwater. Shoes? Forget them. You'll be lucky if you even see a pair before adulthood. You chew on stale bread so hard it could double as a weapon. You drink small beer, a kind of weak ale, because water is basically poison, full of whatever upstream village dumped in their way. You're buzzed before you even hit puberty. Your toys? Rocks, a stick if you're lucky. And if you want fun, you watch the traveling executioner do his job in the village square. It's gruesome, but it's also entertainment. That's medieval Netflix. Some poor thief losing a hand for stealing bread. And chore. Don't forget the chore. Feeding chickens, carrying water, gathering wood, helping in the fields. Childhood is short. By the time you're 7, you're considered strong enough to work from sunup to sundown. What do you eat? Bread. More bread. Did I mention bread? It's coarse, black, made with whatever grains didn't rot that season, and baked into loaves that could double as brick. Meat, rare. Vegetables, seasonal and bland. Sugar, a luxury you'll never take. On feast days, maybe you get pork fat or a watery stew, but most of the time, you live on porridge, cheese, and yesterday's stale loaf dipped in ale to soften it. Malnutrition is normal. Your teeth rot early. Your stomach is always negotiating with hunger. By the time you're 7, you've already seen more sickness than a modern hospital ward. Fleas are everywhere, carrying more diseases than you can count. Your neighbor's got leprosy. Your cousin's coughing blood. And you've got worms in your stomach because half the food is rotten. If you get hurt, God help you. Broken leg? It means you're probably crippled for life. Toothache? That's your tooth being yanked out with pliers while everyone else holds you down. Infection? That's a slow, smelly goodbye. Doctors aren't real scientists. They're more like philosophers with knives. They think your health depends on balancing the 4 humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Too sick? They cut you open and drain some blood. Too sad? Maybe too much black bile. Solution? Enema. Always enemas. Your home isn't cozy. It's one smoky room with a dirt floor, shared with your parents, your siblings, maybe your grandparents, and probably the animals too. Chickens roost in the rafters. Pigs grunt in the corner. Privacy doesn't exist. The walls leak in winter, the thatched roof drips in spring, and the draft blows through year-round. Heating is a fire pit that chokes the room with smoke. The smell is a cocktail of wet straw, sweat, manure, and whatever died under the floorboards last season. And through it all, religion is everywhere. The church bell dictates your day. You don't question it. You don't debate it. You just obey, because not believing means burning, either here by the church court or later in hell. Your life is measured by saints' days, sermons, and the faint hope that suffering now means paradise later. Every cough, every storm, every dead cow is explained as God's will. There's no Google, there's just prayer. And the church isn't just spiritual, it's economic. You tithe. That means you give a chunk of your already pitiful harvest to God, or more specifically, to the priest, who probably lives slightly better than you, but not by much. So far, your life is not epic. It's not noble. It's not Instagram aesthetic. It's mud, hunger, superstition, and body odor strong enough to make modern noses weep. You are a peasant, and life, for peasants, is a daily gamble against starvation, disease, and accidents. And you're just getting started. From here on out, your life is basically labor. Sunrise to sunset, your body is a machine for survival. Spring, plowing. Summer, harvesting. Fall, storing and slaughtering. Winter, freezing, mending, praying you don't starve. There are no weekends. There's no concept of time off. The only rest you get is on holy days. But guess what? Those aren't relaxing either. They're church, fasting, and maybe standing for hours while someone reads Latin you don't understand. The tools are crude. The plow is wooden, the hoe is heavy, and your hands are blistered before you even hit your team. And let's not forget the joy of threshing wheat by hand. You swing, you sweat, you sneeze through clouds of dust until your lungs feel like they're on fire. And at night, you collapse into straw, your muscles knotted, your stomach only half full. Tomorrow, same again. At some point, you're expected to marry, not because of romance. Forget romance. This isn't Romeo and Juliet. This is more like cow and goat. Marriage is a practical deal. You get hitched because your family wants alliances, land, or an extra pair of hands in the field. Love, that's optional. Attraction, a bonus if you're lucky. More often, you're paired off by parents who shake hands and say, "That'll do," and boom, now you've got a spouse. The wedding feast might have a chicken if you're lucky, some bread, some ale, a fiddle if someone in the village can play, and then it's back to work. Because now you're not just feeding yourself, you're raising children who, statistically, half won't make it. Children aren't coddled. They're workforce replacements. They fetch water, chase chickens, guard sheep. By the time they're 6, they're already carrying loads half their weight. And if one dies, you grieve, but not too long. You can't afford to. Survival means moving on. Birth control doesn't exist. Every year is another pregnancy. For women, childbirth is the most common cause of death. For men, it's war or farming accident. You roll the dice with your body every season. Let's say you're a man. At some point, your lord might call on you to fight, and you don't get a choice. The feudal system means you owe him service, so you grab whatever you can pass off as a weapon, maybe a rusty spear, maybe a sharpened stick, and march off. Forget Hollywood sword fights. You don't get shiny armor. That's for the knight class. You're just cannon fodder in wool and leather. You face mud, blood, screaming horses, and steel crashing through bone. If you're lucky, you come back alive. If you're really lucky, you come back with loot. But more often, you come back maimed, coughing, and traumatized. And no one has a word for PTSD. They just call you strange now. Justice in the Middle Ages isn't about fairness. It's about spectacle. Steal bread, lose a hand, gossip about the wrong noble, into the stocks. Accused of witchcraft, say goodbye because the mob is lighting a pyre. Trial by ordeal is common. Accused of lying, you might be told to grab a red-hot iron. If God loves you, your burns will heal. If not, well, maybe you were guilty after all. But let's not pretend it was all misery. Peasants did have some fun, though their version of fun is a bit questionable. Wrestling, bear baiting, cockfights, drunken dancing around bonfire. On feast days, the village would turn into a chaotic carnival of drinking, flirting, and sometimes fistfights. Music mattered. If someone had a lute or a fiddle, the night lit up for a while. Songs about saints, scandal, or just drinking. It was the medieval Spotify playlist. And there were stories, oral tales, fables, legends. Around fires, people whispered of knights, dragons, miracle. You clung to those stories because they made life feel bigger than mud and turnips. Through it all, religion never loosens its grip. You cross yourself before meals. You confess sins you barely understand. The priest thunders about hell, and you believe him because how could you not? Everything in your life is uncertain. Disease, famine, war, except the church. Pilgrimages, relics, indulgences. You pay coins to touch a saint's bone. You hope a pilgrimage to Canterbury might shave years off purgatory. You buy prayers like a spiritual lottery ticket, betting your soul against eternity. By your mid-30s, you're already old by medieval standard. Your back aches, your teeth are falling out, and your hair is gray. If you're lucky, you've dodged famine and plague so far, but the clock is ticking. The medieval dream isn't long life, it's salvation. Because no matter how hard you work, you know death is close and probably not clean. So, what does adulthood in the Middle Ages look like? Not glory, not freedom, but survival. You are one storm away from hunger, one infection away from death, one Lord's whim away from losing everything. And yet, you laugh sometimes. You dance on holy days. You hold your child in the sunlight. You whisper stories by firelight. Somehow, in the grit and grind, life still flickers. But don't get too comfortable, because the worst is still to come. So, you've worked, you've sweated, you've raised kids, you've survived war, and you've pretended not to notice that your priest drinks better wine than anyone else in town. Now, you're entering the twilight of your medieval life, which, in this context, means you're about 40, maybe 50 if you're an overachiever, 60, basically a unicorn. Your teeth are long gone. You gum your bread until it softens in spit. Your bones ache in the cold, and they're almost always cold, because heating is a smoky fire that doesn't reach your toes. Arthritis locks your joints. Cataracts cloud your eyes. And because medical science is basically guesswork with leeches, no one can help you. The cure for joint pain is prayer. The cure for failing vision is also prayer. You're sensing a theme here. You're still working, though. There's no retirement. If you can lift a hoe, you're in the fields. If you can't, you spin wool, mend tools, or watch children. You keep contributing until you literally can't move. And then, of course, there's the plague, the great reaper of the 14th century, but also a recurring visitor before and after. You've probably buried neighbors, family members, maybe even a spouse because of it. It comes like a storm. Rumors first, then coughing, then boils swelling black on the skin, fever, delirium, death within days. You can't run. You can't fight. All you can do is pray the rat under your floorboards isn't carrying the wrong flea. The graveyards overflow. Mass pits open. The priest runs out of words. Survivors wander hollow-eyed, and superstition grows wild. Some people whip themselves in penance. Others blame outsiders. Some just drink until they pass out. If you survive, congratulations. You now live with permanent trauma, and people treat you differently because the plague rewires the world. Entire villages vanish. Fields rot. For a time, the price of labor rises because there are fewer workers. But none of that matters when half your friends are bones in a trench. Maybe it isn't plague that gets you. Maybe it's just age, or infection, or falling off a ladder while thatching a roof. Either way, you feel the creeping weakness. Your breath rattles. Your children hover, already calculating how to split your tiny patch of land. There's no soft hospital bed. There's no morphine drip. Just you, straw, smoke, and the cold breath of mortality. The priest mumbles last rites in Latin. You don't understand the words, but you feel the weight. And then silence. Your family wails, but not for too long. The body has to be buried fast, before it smells worse than the village already does. They wrap you in cloth, dig a shallow grave, and lower you down. The earth is heavy. The world forgets quickly. What's left of you? A name scribbled in a parish record, if you're lucky. A broken wooden spoon you carved, left behind in a cottage that will one day rot and collapse. Maybe a descendant who remembers a story about you, but more likely, nothing. You don't leave books, you don't leave paintings, you don't leave property worth remembering. You fade. That's the medieval way. And yet, there's something oddly comforting in that. You didn't have to make a mark on history. You didn't have to chase fame or fortune. You simply lived, worked, loved a little, lost a lot, and vanished into the soil. And for millions like you, that was enough. When people today imagine the Middle Ages, they picture knights on horseback, ladies in silk gowns, castles glowing with torches. And yes, those existed. But for you, for the 90% living in fields and mud, that wasn't the reality. Your reality was hunger, hard labor, superstition, and constant brushes with death. Life expectancy was short, suffering was long, and glory was rare. And yet, the myth lives on because we want it to. We want the Middle Ages to be romantic, to be noble, because if we stared too long at the truth, the mud, the disease, the screaming at childbirth, the open sewers, we might realize how much human history has been mostly survival. And now, drifting through this grimy world in your imagination, you realize something strange. Even in the mud, even in the cold, people laughed, they drank, they sang, they kissed, they dreamed of heaven. The Middle Ages sucked, yes, but people still found ways to live. Not well, not easily, but enough. And maybe that's the point. History isn't made of grand battles and castles. It's made of peasants trudging through mud, surviving just long enough to pass the torch. You fade, as they all did, into silence, into soil, into sleep.